Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on Azure Synapse Analytics and Power BI. Hope you are all staying safe and healthy. My name is Noor Basha, Marketing Director at WinWire Technologies, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. So as you all know, today's topic for the session is Demystifying Data Monetization with Azure Synapse Analytics and Power BI. In the next 20-25 minutes, we will be discussing how Azure Synapse with Power BI is helping enterprise provide a unified experience and also help them drive data-driven insights from large volumes of data that they have in their different systems. So before we start, let me highlight a few housekeeping items. During the webinar, please feel free to post questions and we will try to answer as many as we can at the end. We are recording this session and we'll be sharing the recording as well as the presentation to you in next 24 to 48 hours. So with that, let me introduce you to today's session speaker, my colleague Srinivaslu. We call him Vasu. Vasu brings close to, he's a technical architect at WinWire Technologies and brings 16 plus years of experience in the enterprise data and analytics platform. He's been working with several enterprise customers, helping them accelerate their modern data and analytics platform initiatives. Also brings very extensive experience in Power BI, data pipelines, transactional and analytical workloads. So without further ado, let me hand it over to Vasu to take it from here. Vasu, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Noor. I hope I'm audible, loud and clear. Noor, you can just confirm me on that.
Yes, Vasu, we can hear you.
Perfect.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks all for joining. As Noor already mentioned, I will be the speaker, and this is me. My full name is Srinivaslu Vishwanathan, and I'm working, as a technical architect in WinWire, handling a lot of, enterprise level data analytics projects. And especially my expertise is in building, the modern data warehouse. That's my main focus. Altogether from past, couple of years, when I stepped into the Azure perspective, right? So let's actually move on to the agenda today. We're going to discuss, pretty, important topics, we have, which is of, the business opportunity and challenges. Especially the modern data warehouse. This particular piece of it itself is the most interesting, piece in today. And indeed, whatever we discuss in terms of the modern data warehouse, the case study which we have implemented in WinWire and which we will actually go in detail about, in our discussion today. And finally, we will spend some couple of more minutes in terms of, analyzing the or talking about the Q&A. That's basically our complete agenda to it. Let's move on to the business opportunities. As you know, the world is full of opportunities, and especially when you are the owner of the data itself, right? The moment data comes into the picture, I always remember one of the quote which we keep discussing even in WinWire as well. Information is the oil of 21st century, and analytics is just the combustion engine, right? Which means you just need to know what is the best way of using your own data because the information is everywhere. So that's the place where we will be talking only about the data perspective. In terms of the opportunities, what we have currently available in our real world scenarios is about how exactly you're going to monetize on your consumer insights, right? Which means every project, whatever we are implementing it in some or the other way, you should, really make sure that some monetization, typically happens on top of it, right? So that's the reason, we will be spending more time on understanding on that and empower consumers with data-driven insights. I would say, whenever we say the data-driven insights, your data should speak, than the, human-driven, decisions to it. That is the reason the data-driven insights are way too powerful in terms of it. And better decision-making, the decision-making, should be very much aligned to your data-driven, insights itself. And quick and easy access to all, data and history. the reason why we have this is like data is available everywhere, and it's a mammoth, and it is growing exponentially, right? So you need to use that particular data in a very proper way and make sure that you understand the current data, what it is flowing in your system, and as well as analyze the data, what your historical data, what exactly it is telling it, and then you decide based on the data driven perspective, right? So these are all the typical business opportunities which are available. And when it comes to the challenges, what we have, in the current market, to implement these business opportunities is purely in terms of growing volume of data. As you know, day by day, we are getting, a huge amount of data, and exponentially, the data is, multiplying it, and it is basically in terms of the terabyte scale to it. And that's one of the major problem. And how exactly we will spend in terms of the processing of this particular data large data volume. And we are talking about some terabytes and petabytes of data sitting in our different types of systems. How do we actually connect and get the data out of it, right? And it is not only about the complete getting the data, but your data should speak in terms of what exactly the accuracy of your analytics and insights to your consumer. So when we say the accuracy and analytics insights, most of the times we will be spending time in terms of most of the times business will be considering of a previous day of data, they will be seeing it. But nowadays everybody is looking at the near real time. How exactly we will implement that? That's the one which we can which we will be discussing it today. And indeed, the number of users, number of consumers are increasing. So obviously, we need to think of high level concurrency to it, right? So when we say the high level concurrency, there should not be any kind of time words for user, and some kind of memory issues when large number of users are hitting into the any kind of platform. So that's the one the currently every project or every enterprise will be having a challenge to it. And this is the place where the modern data warehouse come into the picture, right? What exactly this modern data warehouse, and to which type of organizations it is going to typically suit for it, right? It is most of the enterprise level. And when if you have a typical enterprise system where you have multiple data sources which is like your typical line of business in-house different systems, which is completely a structured data. And you have here typically the logs and streams which is purely in terms of a semi-structured and then unstructured data, which is become as part of your source. And you're using Azure Data Factory as part of your ELT engine to it. Why I'm saying ELT engine, which we will discuss in detail to it. And indeed, the unstructured data or the semi-structured data, which is especially the JSON, the fast way of transferring the data. When you have a nested JSON to it, Azure Data Factory is not able to support it. That's the reason you need to transform the unstructured and semi-structured data using the Azure Data Bricks, which is basically an Apache Spark as part of it. And Azure Data Lake is just a kind of as is dumped to whatever we are receiving it from the sources, so that we will have one copy to it, and we will not lose any kind of data to it. And once we have done, through the ADF, we are connecting to the source, we are getting the data and loading into the, Synapse Analytics. That's basically our data warehouse, as part of it. And Azure Data Bricks indeed, typically loads the data into the data lake, and as well as, it will be pushing the data into the, Synapse Analytics, through the, ADF itself, or by running the notebooks through the ADF. And finally, the data is sitting in your, typical data warehouse, and with the proper dimensional, modeling with the dimension and facts. And now, you need a proper, reporting tool. That's the place where, we will be having some kind of, Power BI perspective, right? And indeed, you can have, your multiple business services pointing to the same data warehouse, where the data is already sitting in a very good shape manner. So that's the place where, you can actually plug in any kind of business service, what you're already having it, right? So to further move on it, we will be discussing, little further detail in terms of this architecture itself. One of the, few of the major components which we will be discussing it. mainly towards the Azure Synapse Analytics. We will discuss more about the Azure Data Factory and the Power BI, which are quite pretty complex, and as well as an easy way of implementation, right? In terms of your large volumes of data, as part of your connecting to the different types of sources to it. So Synapse Analytics, as you already know earlier, when Azure, came into the picture, it was purely on top of Azure SQL Data Warehouse. Now it has been, renamed as the Synapse Analytics, and basically it's purely formally a data warehouse now. Very much in terms of, four major components we have it, which I feel, are the biggest advantages of, the Synapse Analytics is of, elastic scaling, where you can actually scale up and scale down whenever it is required. And indeed, you can actually associate a large, workloads to your typical resource classes, so that, indeed the workload balancing will be taken care of it. That's the place where elastic scaling will come into the picture. And massive parallel processing, as the world, we have been moved from typical, row level data into the columnar store, databases. So that's the place where the MPP, came into the picture, and, it's really useful for easy data migration, large volumes of data of, processing, part of it. So think of a scenario where you have, terabytes of data that is sitting in your, let's say some kind of, FTP location, or different, OLDDB or ODBC systems. You just have to get that data into the data warehouse, and that's pretty fast way. We can actually get into the data warehouse through this MPP. And MPP architecture is purely a kind of scalable environment, so you don't need to worry about in terms of the compute perspective. And one of the major advantage of the data warehouse or the Synapse Analytics is of you can actually pause and resume whenever it is required. Which means, most of the times, all the BI projects, we will be thinking of, maybe the early morning loads or the, off business hours loads, right? So the moment the loads are done, then you don't need, the compute, to be keep on running, where, you don't have any kind of queries that are firing to the database, from the reporting. So that's the place where no point of running the system. So that's the place, you can think of, you can pause the system when it is not required and resume the system when it is, typically required, especially for our data loads. And finally, the limitless storage. It's a pretty straightforward statement, which is like no limit on storage, and separated from the compute, so that there is no connectivity to it, and you have a you can actually have a petabytes of scale of data can be loaded into it. Now let's move on to the Azure Data Factory. We know that this ADF has been there in the industry quite a long time, and everybody knows about it, and it's a pretty good ELT, a kind of drag and drop factory which is developed by the Microsoft itself, which is very easy to integrate, where you have a number of sources where you can connect to it, and then you can actually transform the data into or move the data into the number of destinations available. And it's basically the cost efficient and fully managed serverless cloud setup. We don't need to worry about it. It will actually expand based on your data loads, and indeed you can actually define your integration units whenever it is required to it. And finally, the polybase, where most of the times if you're having the data residing in your blob or the ADL, that's the fastest way to move the data from blob or ADL to the data warehouse. And that's one of the best, where it typically uses a lot of the big data clusters to move the data very faster into the data warehouse. And finally, we have been in the premise world for more than few decades, and we can actually put use as is premise system into the Azure cloud, and ADF typically supports the SSIS integration as well. And indeed you can actually call your SSIS packages when you're migrating from premise to the Azure cloud. Let's move on to the Power BI Pro and Premium and Embed. As everybody know, even Power BI has been in the industry for quite a long time, and as we know that we already have two different licenses, Pro and Free. And Premium and Embed are typically used for the dedicated capacities, where to perform large volume of data loads, and as well as processing, memory in memory processing, and big data analysis perspective, right? everybody knows about the advantages of the Power BI, but I'm completely concentrating only on these four components. Where on a high level I will touch base now, and then when we move on to the customer case study, I will actually relate that particular business scenario and then explain it this in detail to it, right? And the first advantage to it is a composite model. I believe whenever we work on the Power BI, always define the PBIX files with the direct and import queries. And power of aggregations, indeed, you can actually build your in-memory layer for pre-aggregated values. I always have, suggest, to the clients as well, where if you're having access to the source system and the full control access to the source system, then push across all the aggregations, into your database itself instead of doing everything in the in-memory Power BI side. If you don't have access to it, then it's better to do it in the Power BI, which is purely a managed aggregations concept in Power BI. And finally, the large data sets for premium. As everybody know, Pro is completely 1 GB of data set size limit, and premium comes with up to 10 GB. And when we say premium, we have the capacities of P1, P2, P3, and it goes up to P6 as well. P1 is having less than 3 GB of the PBIX file. P2 is having less than 6 GB of it, and P3 onwards, it actually goes up to 10 GB. Now, this is the place where it becomes more interesting to it. When we are having a large volumes of data, how exactly you're going to grow beyond the 10 GB. That's the one which we will discuss in detail. And embed report into the app. Indeed, Power BI is having a wonderful feature of embedding all your Power BI reports into an application, third-party application, and you can actually have your set of security model when you are accessing that, right? And I will take a pause on this particular slide. This particular slide typically talks about configuring the large data sets, which we will first discuss about the customer case study, and then we will actually come and talk in detail about this particular slide itself. Now let's talk about more in terms of the customer case study. One of very much esteemed customer with WinWire came up with the problem statement. When we say esteemed, the customer has been in the industry for more than a century, and they are the leading distributors of books to public libraries and schools in US. And of course been in the industry for more than 180 years, and they have a mammoth of data that is residing in their systems, different types of systems, which is of typically of the mainframes and the typical Oracle and Teradata's perspective. But indeed, they are not able to use the complete data to it. That's the place where customer came up with a business question saying that, I have terabytes of data sitting in my transactional systems, but approximately around 17 billion records, which we really wanted to do some kind of analysis, which is exactly some past a decade of data, which is 17 billion. And how do I make use of it, right? And that's the biggest part of it. Even when we started initially the challenges perspective, the data is really growing these days. How do we literally make use of that particular data into our analysis or analytics perspective? That's a major piece of it, right? And the next statement where it said that, okay, hey, we have literally tried this particular system, which is like we already have one system that is inbuilt. But somehow, the system is not scalable enough, and it's not able to handle the massive amount of data, when it is connecting and fetching the data from the source system, and especially building some kind of BI reporting, right? And current setup is restricting the concurrent user setups, especially concurrent users up to 10. So which means it is like only 10 users at any given point of time. 10 users can actually log in, and they're not able to actually go beyond the 10 users, which is like a kind of restriction to the concurrency perspective itself, right? And moreover, they have seen that when they're running this particular project or existing project, the current setup said that the current architecture itself is like running on a high-end machines, and the cost is way too much. How do I actually reduce that as well, right? That's the place where WinWire came into the picture. And we started analyzing their systems, and we started understanding the current setup. When we started understanding the current setup, we saw that these are the tools, fell short of the features where they're not able to, fulfill the need of what the client, typically needs it, what my customer typically wants it. The entire setup has been done in terms of the AWS, and they are running on top of very high-end machines, which is very costly in terms of continuously running it. And indeed, for the BI reporting perspective, they have used the ClickSense as part of the BI reporting, right? Now, as we know, AWS, ClickSense, everybody is the market leaders, and what is the best way of, attacking this particular customer case study? That's the major piece of our discussion. Now, WinWire, we did some, a good amount of research, and indeed, the modern data warehouse, we know that modern data warehouse will be the best fit, but we need to customize that, as part of our, typical, the case or the customer, right? Customer problem statement to it. That's the place where we have customized, based on our typical modern data warehouse, taken the very good components out of the modern data warehouse and built in a very good, a proven architecture, which has been, implemented and as well as, live in the system where the customer is typically using it now. It's pretty much, the same, what we have seen in the modern data warehouse, where we have, the multiple sources here that is connecting to the, existing system from the customer. And we are basically using the Azure Data Lake storage just to dump whatever the data which we are getting it. We're just dumping the data over there. We're not doing any kind of analytics, even though the ADLA is available to us. And using the ADF, that's the best way to move the data from, connecting to the source, get the data, and then load it into your, data lake, right? We are not doing any kind of transformations or the business calculations here at this piece. Now, the data is residing in your data lake, and we are moving into the Azure Synapse Analytics, which is purely a data warehouse where we have built the dimensions and facts by understanding the business scenarios, by understanding the business calculations. We have built a very good, data model itself. Indeed, you cannot have a relationships directly as part of a dimensional modeling in data warehouse, but as part of your ADF, we have used a poly-based mechanism. ADL supports the poly-based mechanism, and when we are connecting to the sink, which is of the Synapse Analytics, and indeed, we have used the Power BI Premium to it, which is typically all our self-service BI reporting perspective, and we have actually embedded the reports as well into the .NET application, where the external users which are not part of the Azure Active Directories of the customer, they can actually log in, and while logging itself, we have provided a very good security layer so that they're confined to see their own data itself, right? And indeed, it's a purely a third-party integration of anywhere you can actually put across your data analytics layer by connecting to these and build any other tools out of it, because the data is residing in ADL, and the data is already shaped in a very well mannered in Synapse Analytics, which is used or consumed by the other projects or the projects within the customer itself. Now, if you look at it, there are a couple of challenges, which we have faced it, because I am talking about some terabytes of data which we are moving into the system, which is into the data lake and as well as to the Synapse Analytics. And I'm talking about some 17, concurrent users, and I'm actually talking about large data sets. 17 billion, you cannot actually fit, into the Power BI Premium, which is a 10 GB of size limit, right? That is the place where all our topics, whatever we have been discussing, till now, which is of the ADF is used, very effectively in terms of, connecting to the sources and get the data into it. And Synapse Analytics has been used to, process all these, 17 billion and as well as the incremental loads. And Power BI Premium has been used to process large data volumes to it. And we have implemented, I'm going back to the same slides of it, which is like, as the direct and import queries are the best way of implementing in the Power BI side. And we have used, the aggregations, most of the aggregations, as we have got control to the source system, which is our underlying data warehouse. We have pushed most of the data aggregations to the, data warehouse itself. And few of the aggregations which are way too light, which we have kept it on top of the Power BI side. And indeed, the moment if you're looking for any kind of granular information, you can actually, we have, kept a live query to the, data warehouse so that there won't be any kind of entire data getting into the Power BI. Now, you can see that, we have touched based on, the greater than 10 GB. How do we grow, beyond the 10 GB? That's the place where, we will discuss in terms of configuring it now, which is, you create a data set in Power BI desktop. And when you really wanted to implement this particular thing, which is like going beyond the large, 10 GB of the data set size, you need to have some kind of, prerequisites to it. One of the prerequisites will be of the incremental refresh itself, right? And you might be having some kind of question, hey, why do we need to, put across, everything in terms of the Power BI premium? You can actually use the Azure Analysis Services as part of your caching layer, model the data properly, and then, put across as a live query to the Power BI. But even this particular concept of it, indeed, we have, thought through it, but unfortunately, AAS, and handling this large amount of data is a very, very costly affair in Azure. And indeed, we already have a very good features and available in the Power BI Premium, which handles large volumes of data. Which is, if the client would have came before March 2020, then I would have actually kept it as Azure Analysis Service as part of the architecture. But the moment after March release, Power BI came up with a very powerful approach of growing beyond the 10 GB as the Power BI data set limit. This is one of the feature or one of the advantage of it, why we can actually drop off Azure Analysis Services as part of your architecture going forward, as because the Power BI typically supports this kind of architecture to it. Now, how do I configure it, right? This is one of, we have, a good amount of, links that are typically available, but we have tried this particular setup. We have indeed, gone beyond the 10 GB. We have actually have a data set, Power BI data sets, which is around 20 GB to 30 GB to it, where most of the aggregated level data has been pushed into the data sets itself. One of the major prerequisites of having the large data sets is of the Power BI desktop. When you're creating a report, Power BI desktop should have an incremental refresh, which means you need to have a range start and range end. And finally, you're going to publish it, and you will be using these kind of, typically the commandlets, which will be typically used for any kind of, refresh, in terms of, growing beyond the 10 GB limit. Now, that's the, the complete, proven architecture of what we have built it. So in terms of, finally concluding, this particular, piece of our, typical discussion, I would like to, say that as whenever you have a scenario of like this, where you have a large amount of data volumes, you don't have any kind of control, where the data is really, growing, and you really don't know how exactly, you're going to build your analytics on top of it, and, build some kind of, data modeling and as well as, analytics, and use that particular data itself as part of your monetization. This is the best architecture which has typically proven, till now, and we have, become success by implementing this, particular thing. Now, every user, whoever, getting access to the embedded, indeed, they are typically, paying a kind of, subscription model, because data is everywhere and data is valuable, and indeed you have spent good amount of analytics on top of building it. So indeed, that's the place where you will be monetized on top of your data when you are, typically giving it to the, real customers to it. So that's the, end of my, typical view and, conclusion. And indeed, we have some couple more minutes. We can take up a quite a quick pause and then, spend some time on the Q&A.
Hey Vasu, thanks a lot for the quick session and overview on Azure Synapse, and in fact, a good a case study of how one of the largest media distribution company leveraged Azure Synapse as well as Power BI Premium to monetize data. Yeah, I know we just like have a couple of minutes, but I do have certain questions. The first question that comes from Mark is, you did talk about unstructured and semi-structured data, but how do we really handle in a real case scenario? Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, unstructured data, typically we use, Azure Data Bricks, as part of the middle layer, where you can just transform the data, because Synapse Analytics or the formerly data warehouse doesn't, handle the unstructured data as is. So you really have to transform the data. So we will be using the Azure Data Bricks as part of the middle layer. where you can actually write some Apache Spark code, and can transform the data into a meaningful information and load it into
Great.
the Synapse Analytics. That's the best way of implementing it.
Thanks, Vasu. This is an interesting question. So I know we like handling large volume of data in Power BI, but what could be the report performance when we are handling such a large volume of data?
Oh, wow, that's a wonderful question. So if you look at it, the industry standard is of, any report when you build it, a report should load, in less than 4 seconds. That's the industry standard. So you need to design your reports in such a way that, it is actually complying to it. And in terms of the implementation, what we have done it to the customer, currently what we have seen it now, it is less than 3 seconds. All our reports are loading where it is actually connecting to a mammoth of data and then loading it. So it's indeed less than 4 seconds of our report loading performance.
Great. Thanks a lot. So one last question. I know just we are 1 minute over, but I think I would want to take this question again. This is on Power BI. So how fast is Power BI Premium incremental refresh?
Incremental refresh in Power BI is of morely, when you define the incremental setup, for the first time, it always takes time to load it. But whereas the subsequent refreshes will be very fast because you are Power BI typically, is intelligent enough actually to create the partitions at the back end and then, delete and recreate the partitions only only for the days that are typically processing it. That's the way, the incremental refresh works in Power BI. And we have seen it, to load, a few billions of records. It has taken maybe, close to 4 hours to, 5 hours in as the first time load, but the subsequent refreshes are less than, 20 minutes to 30 minutes. That's the implementation which we have seen it in the architecture, what we have implemented.
Great. That's wonderful. Again, thanks a lot, Vasu, for taking time to walk us through this wonderful session on Azure Synapse plus Power BI. I hope like our audience found it very useful and informative. And thanks a lot again for everyone for taking time to join this session. Hope you find it informative. Stay safe, stay healthy. See you soon in our next webinar. Thanks, Vasu.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Stay safe. Bye.